Alright, it's the four-wheeler doctor again. How y'all doing out there? I'm gonna let y'all get a little shot of the next one on the repair list. A little Am DS90. Not sure exactly what year model this thing is. Got a little FMF pipe on it. I'm guessing probably a 2008, something like that. 2009, 10, something like that. I'll figure that out as I dig into it. This got a transmission problem. It'll roll sometimes it locks up and won't roll at all. It's almost like a tooth broke off in the transmission. This is a belt drive bike, but it does have a forward and reverse, so I'm guessing that it's hung somewhere in either the forward or reverse gear. It doesn't seem to make any difference which gear you have it in as to what it does. And as you can tell, we got a clean board in this case. Means I hadn't ever worked on one of these before, so I'm kind of going at it blind. First thing I hope to do is take this cover off here by the shifter. I'm sure the shifter is going to have to come out, so we'll pull the cover off here by the chain guard shifter. Usually on most of these bikes, Can-Ams in particular, the transmission is separate from the motor. If it's separate on this one, there's not a very big gap between them, because I can almost see where they're touching in there. Also going to naturally pull off the clutch cover, belt cover I mean, and get in there to the clutches so we can get those off. And then I'm not real sure what else we're going to do. I guess we'll figure it out as we get there. Alright, just wanted to start you off with a new video, and I'll pick back up in a little bit once I get a few things tore off of this thing. Alright guys, back again. It's been a couple days, but jump back on this little Can-Am DS90. I'll try to pull that belt cover off, and also the kickstart 10mm bolt there. All the other ones are 8. We'll see, really want to see here if the transmission is separate than the motor on this bike, but I'll come back in just a second and let you see what I found. Alright, I got all the bolts out. Due to the kind of tight tolerance between the bolt head and the cover there, I had to actually switch to a 1/4 inch drive, 8mm, so it would fit in there a little easier. This bike here was missing a few bolts, and also I had to take off a snap ring that was on the kickstart, as well as a washer there. Make sure you keep up with those. And there's actually a gasket on this thing, but it doesn't appear to be stuck. So you pull the intake and exhaust off on the belt cover, and it looks like the kickstart unwound, so I'll have to wind that back up before it's all said and done. Clutches here look good. The only thing I see that jumps out at me real quick is this rear clutch has a good bit of wobble in it, almost like a bearings broke on it. I'm gonna have to pull this air box off to look for sure, but I'm pretty positive that this transmission is part of the engine case. So with that being said, I may have to pull this whole motor off just to get into the transmission to see what's wrong with these gears here. But I guess first matter of business, while I got this thing tore apart, is I'm gonna see how to line this kickstart back up. It shouldn't be too bad. Alright, I'll come right back when I get it wound up. Alright guys, like I said before, when we were taking this thing apart, I mentioned this snap ring and washer on here for the Kickstarter. Whatever you do, do not take that off. I'll just show you what happens if you do. If you take that off, this shaft will slide out, and this spring that preloads the kickstart will come undone, and it is very tough to get fish back around here. Only thing I found to be able to do is clip it on here, and had to tie a piece of wire to this side to actually get it fished back around under here until I could catch it back on this tab, and that's while the shaft was locked in there. You don't have to take that off. If you're removing your belt cover, you do not have to take that snap ring and washer off. And this piece here was also in there as well. It goes in just like that, and as it rotates, it'll catch on those teeth. So I'm going to take this piece of wire off here, but do not take the snap ring and washer off of the kickstart. Alright, I went ahead and loosened up the nut on this. This will be the driven pulley, the secondary clutch. There's also an O-ring right on the end of that shaft, and then the big nut there, it's a 24 millimeter, and then when that's loose, the whole clutch will slide off. Still getting a lot of movement out of that shaft. I'm thinking that's gonna be our issue here. Get a little bit of slack in it. There it is. Alright, I'll just try to take the clutch and everything off at one time. This is a CVT kind of mixed with a centrifugal clutch. It's got some weights on it there. Not real sure exactly what kind of clutch configuration you call this, but it's a mixture of a CVT and a go-kart, I guess you'd say. Alright, with that off, you see you still got a lot of play in that shaft. I'll bet you that's what the problem is. Only thing is to get in there to it. Really not sure how you do it. It appears that this cover doesn't come off, or this clutch side is on some of the motors, so it appears that I'm going to have to pull this motor off and tear it down, motor and transmission all as one. So that's probably all I'm going to get done tonight, but I'll probably get to pulling this thing off maybe tomorrow night. Alright guys, back again. I left you off with getting the secondary clutch off of there, finding we got a bunch of play in this shaft. I'm going to end up having to pull this whole motor off, so that's what I'm going to start on tonight. Start off with, I'm going to pull this air box out of here just so I can get the motor out. It appears there's a bolt here, bolt on the other side, and a bolt back here in the back, and in order to get those out, it's got to be picked up and slid forward. So with that being said, if I move this air box, remove this foot peg, I guess you'd call it here, net, and loosen up those bolts, it looks like it might slide out of here. Actually, there's one more set of bolts right there. Hold it from the top. And there may be something here behind the air box. If I find that, I'll cut the camera back on. But start off with, I'm going to pull this air box off and pull this foot peg off, and probably go ahead and loosen these bolts up for the motor mount. Alright, to get this air box out, there's a clamp here at the carburetor, Phillips head. Take that out. Then there's also a screw all the way across here. You can actually see the head of it right there. Take that out, and the air box will come out. Also, one little clear hose here that you had to slide off. The air box will come out on this side. If you loosen this bolt here all the way up, if you don't loosen it up, it won't come out. And as you can tell, I didn't have it loose, but there you go. So with that off, it comes out like that. It's got a little intake there, and then there's a drain that hangs off the back of it. It's kind of wedged in there by the motor. There you go. Air box off. Stick this bolt back in here so I don't lose it. And now for the foot pegs, I believe I can take these two 12mm bolts off. Yes, two 12mm, and then this one here, and these two screws here, and it will let this whole thing slide over. Well, I'll have to untie these little straps here, but that'll be pretty much it. So I'm going to get this side off because I think this side will be easier to pull it out on. I got the floorboard off. You do have to take this center bolt out here, another 12mm. These were 12mm heads and 13mm nuts. And there's also a clamp right here where these two floorboards meet. You have to loosen that clamp up so you can slide the actual floorboard piece off up there, and then take the two bolts out of the fender like I mentioned before. Okay, so I got this side's pretty much where I can get the motor out, so I'm going to loosen these engine bolts up. Like I said, there's a bolt here, one on the other side, one down here, and one across the back up here. So we'll get all those loose and probably go ahead and unhook this starter. Actually, I'm going to have to find out where it plugs in because it doesn't even screw into the starter. But I will take this ground wire off from the other side. And fuel lines, probably just unbolt the carburetor. It's also pretty easy to get to, so unbolt that. And then I need to loosen the exhaust up on the other side. So I'm going to do a few of those things. I'll come back in just a minute. Alright, I'm back over here on the right side now. Took this little chain guard protector thing off. It had two Allen head bolts. They were 5mm and a big Phillips head bolt here. I took all those off just to be able to get the bolt heads over here on this side for those rear motor mounts. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull those off, and I got the one on the other side loose. I'm gonna also break the one up here on the front loose. Hadn't done that yet, so get those off and work on a little bit on this right side. Also, one other thing I'd like to add: this Can-Am is no different than any of the other ones. Can-Am's the world's worst for using every size fastener imaginable to put these things together. It's not like a Honda where you could take a 10, a 12, a 14, and maybe a 17, take the whole bike apart. This thing here, these motor mounts, for instance, they have a 14mm head on the bolt and a 17mm nut. And all these other bolts I've taken out that were 12mm headed, they have a 13mm nut. So it's the craziest thing, but I've always said when you work on a Can-Am, you've got to get every tool out of the toolbox. And that's probably how it's going to wind up before I get this one completely pulled out. So just wanted to throw that in there for you. Alright, I'm getting the electrical stuff off now. Took this ground wire off from that starter bolt there. To get the starter wire off, like I said before, it doesn't have an actual bolt in there. It's it's like made onto the starter. So I just pulled the starter solenoid down, and I'm just going to remove the bolt from the starter solenoid. There's also two connectors here for, I believe this is reverse and neutral, the safety lights. I'm just going to put an X on one of these because it looks like they're the same, so I'll know I'm get those plugged back in together, or not together, correctly. And it appears there's something else hooked in here. I'm not sure where it goes to. Oh, no, that's the starter solenoid. Okay, we're also going to have to have some wires somewhere else for the stator and all that. I'll have to find those in a minute, so I'll turn the camera back on when I get to the electrical wires on there. Alright, I found the stator wires. They come out from over here on the right side and run up. They actually have two cable ties that clamp them to the frame, and they run over here to the left side, and you can pull it down. See that there's a plug, one snaps, and then two barrel connectors that also just pull right apart for your charging system. And as far as I can tell, that looks like everything on the motor as far as electrical stuff goes. I also had to take the spark plug wire off naturally to get that out. I'm going to drain the oil out of this thing so it don't make a mess once I get the motor off. So drain the oil and finish getting the exhaust bolt off. This one on this side over here on the left side of the bike, a little tough to get to. So I'm going to do that. Also need to unhook this breather hose that comes off the exhaust. And I think that's going to be it. I may try to slide that head pipe off just to make it a little easier to get the motor out. But I'm going to see what I can do with that. Alright guys, here we are now. I went ahead and took this shifter loose because it's not going to slide out the other side. Probably could have took the little handle off of it, but I just didn't. I just took the bolt, 10mm bolt out and slipped it off the shaft there. The exhaust, I took one of the bolts out of the exhaust here, and it was pretty easy to get to. The other one is very tough to get to. I got to looking at this thing. It looks like I went ahead and slipped the muffler off of it, which comes apart here. It looks like this motor and exhaust will come out of here all at one time and just be just as easy to loosen it up and tighten it back up while it's on the ground. So that's what my plan is on that. I also need to take this chain off. I think I can get enough slack in it by moving this adjuster down and just slipping it off the pulley sprocket, I mean. And once that's done, pretty much slide the thing out. I don't think there's anything else holding it, so I'm gonna come back to you in just a second and see if I can get this thing started out, and then maybe video it as I pull it out. Alright guys, here we go. We'll see if I can slide this thing out of here. Only thing I'm not real sure about is there's a little tube that comes off. It's actually the intake that the carburetor hooks to. That thing may hit as I try to slide it out. We'll see. I'm gonna give it a shot before I remove it. Well, it's going to be tough to get out of there because I didn't even remove the top motor mount bolt. See? Didn't take that one out. Now it should come out a little easier. It's going to be easier to swing this rear around first. And then slide that. Slide the front out next. That shifter's got to get hung. I probably should have took it on off as well. And then there you go. That's how you pull the motor out. Just like that. Wasn't too bad. Took me maybe an hour or so, if that, to get all this out. So next order of business, since we got transmission issues here, it does look like that this transmission will separate. There's not a crack in it here on this side, so it's not going to separate there. But there is a cover here, and these are, the transmission is separate from the motor. You can see a gap down in there. So I'm thinking I can just take this cover off and get to the guts of the transmission, figure out what's wrong. I'll probably do another video on that. May actually just add on to this one, because I don't think it's going to take long to tear that down. Alright, I've got this little Can-Am motor on the bench now. Gonna try to get this transmission cover off and figure out what's going on with the transmission. It looks like it'll come off. It's you can see here it's separated from the motor. Got to get the exhaust out of the way. This sprocket, two 10mm bolts to get it off. The exhaust is another 10. I probably could have took that off on the bike, but it would have been a lot tougher. And it looks like this thing's made so that you can slip this off, but this oil tube's in the way, but it's got a bolt in it, so you take the bolt off and that oil tube will come out. And I believe that's all I'm gonna have to take loose. Looks like this bolt. The exhaust does have a little bracket here, so get that off, get the exhaust out, get this clamp off, and the sprocket will slide off. Take these bolts out, and then the cover should come off. I'll get all those off and cut the camera back on right before I pull the cover off. Guys, I did have to take this shifter bracket off. It's like a Phillips head screws holding that in. One of the screws held the exhaust bracket on, the other one actually holds this on, but I had to get it off to be able to access those two bolts right there behind it. So I went ahead and pull that off. Still got to get that sprocket off and the oil tube. I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Also on this sprocket, I'll just show you the little trick to getting it off. You take the two bolts out, this little collar has to twist until the grooves line up with the grooves in the actual shaft, and it will slide off. It's kind of a secondary lock to get these, to keep these sprockets from falling off, and then the sprocket will slip right off after that. So just wanted to show you that. Alright guys, I got this thing apart. What we tore up here, I tried to video this earlier, me tearing all this down, but it didn't look real good, so I'm going to do it again here holding the camera. We still got some wobble in this shaft here, this output shaft, so I'm going to replace that bearing there. But the main issue is this output gear here has got two teeth broke off of it, and the gear that it meshes to, this is the, I'm assuming this is the drive gear and this is the reverse gear. This drive gear also is missing a couple teeth, and a couple of them's chewed up, so that's what we're going to have to replace. This gear, and that bearing down in there to get this thing back rolling. So I may do another video of putting it back together, but I might not. It might take a little while for these parts to come in, so I'll probably just end up uploading this video as a teardown video. So hit that subscribe button and like my video if you can, or if you do, and I'll be posting some more. I've got all kind of stuff to work on here. Got a little 420 Rancher with on a independent frame, foot shift actually, and I got a differential to do in this 500 Foreman, so I'll have some videos on those in the near future.